That's the dumbest business plan I've ever heard, and I've been in business for 42 years. My father's voice wasn't angry, that would have been easier to handle. It was disappointed, which was somehow worse. Disappointment is permanent. Anger fades. He picked up my pitch deck from the mahogany dining table, the one that my mother had selected specifically because it looked impressive and hosted important family dinners, and he held it between his thumb and forefinger like it was contaminated. Then he threw it in the trash. The papers scattered as they fell, landing among coffee grounds and yesterday's newspaper, which seemed like a deliberate metaphor for what my father thought of my life's work. I watched them settle into the garbage, and I didn't say anything. Arguing with my father had never worked. My father, whose name was Gregory Thompson, had built a real estate development empire from nothing. He'd started as a contractor in 1982, borrowed $50,000 from his brother, and turned it into a company that managed over $2 billion in commercial properties across the Pacific Northwest. When he spoke about business, people listened. When he spoke about my business plan, apparently, he threw it in the trash. "You're going to lose everything," he continued, walking over to the kitchen island where my mother was pretending to read a book but was actually listening to every word. "You're going to take out loans you can't pay back. You're going to invest money that should be invested in actual assets. And in 3 years, you're going to come crawling back to me, asking for help, telling me you learned your lesson." My mother looked at me with an expression that said, "Your father loves you, he's just terrified you're going to fail," but what she said out loud was, "Gregory, maybe let's hear Marcus out before." "No," my father said, and that was the end of the conversation. In my family, "no" from Gregory Thompson was a period at the end of a sentence. It was final. It was absolute. It meant there was nothing left to discuss. I was 28 years old and my father still had the power to make me feel like I was 8 years old, caught with my hand in the cookie jar trying to explain why I'd taken something that wasn't mine. The thing about having a successful parent is that your own success will always be measured against theirs, and it will always come up short. My father had built an empire. I was proposing to build an app, a platform that would use AI to optimize commercial real estate portfolios by predicting market trends and identifying undervalued properties before institutional investors could. It was a good idea. I genuinely believed it was a good idea. I had a computer science degree from Stanford and an MBA from Wharton, and I spent the last 4 years working at one of the most successful VC firms in Silicon Valley. I understood the technology. I understood the market. I understood the potential. What I didn't understand was how to convince my father that I wasn't him, and I didn't need to be him to be successful. "I'm going to do this," I said quietly. "With or without your approval." My father laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed off the 10-foot ceilings of my parents' house in Seattle, the house that was probably worth $3 million, the house that represented everything my father had built and everything I was apparently going to lose when my startup failed spectacularly. "You don't have the capital," he said. "You don't have experience. You don't have a network. You have a Stanford degree and an MBA, which apparently taught you nothing about real business. Real business isn't an idea. Real business is execution. Real business is making money, not losing it. Real business is what I do." "I'm leaving," I said, and I meant it. I stood up from the dining chair, which was custom-made Italian leather, another one of my mother's touches, and I walked toward the front door of the house I'd grown up in, the house that suddenly felt smaller than it had when I was actually small enough to run through its hallways without touching the walls. "Marcus," my mother called after me. "Don't go like this. Please." I paused at the door. My mother was standing in the kitchen, looking the way she always looked when my father and I fought, caught in the middle, trying to be loyal to both of us simultaneously, failing at both. I wanted to go back. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to say something that would make this okay. Instead, I nodded at her and left. I'd been working on the business plan for 6 months before I showed it to my father. 6 months of writing code with my co-founder, a Stanford classmate named Derek who actually understood technology in a way that I was still learning. 6 months of market research, of analyzing the commercial real estate industry, of identifying the pain points that our AI could solve. 6 months of building something that I believed in completely, even though I had no money and no way to fund it. The startup was called Apex Analytics. The name was Derek's idea, though I suggested it after he thrown out a list of options that all sounded like password-protected government databases. The premise was simple: We would use machine learning algorithms to analyze historical property data, market trends, and economic indicators to predict which commercial real estate properties would increase in value over the next 3 to 5 years. We would sell access to this data to institutional investors, commercial real estate firms, and large-scale developers. We would make money through subscription fees and premium analysis packages. It was a B2B software play in a market that was already dominated by established players like CoStar and CBRE. In other words, it was exactly the kind of idea that made old-school businessmen like my father dismiss it immediately. He understood buildings. He understood land. He understood the tangible, physical reality of real estate development. He did not understand software. He did not understand algorithms. He did not understand the venture capital model of lose money for 3 years, then go public and make billions. I needed $5 million to get started. I needed money for development, for hiring engineers, for marketing, for infrastructure. I needed enough capital to operate for at least 2 years without revenue, which meant I needed enough for salaries, benefits, and operating expenses. I'd calculated it down to the penny. The problem was, I didn't have $5 million. I had $50,000 in savings and a part-time consulting gig that paid my rent. What I had, though, was a plan and a pitch deck and an idea that Derek and I truly believed could change how people invested in real estate. So I'd spent the past month going to venture capital firms, pitching the idea, and getting rejected by every single one. The feedback was always the same: interesting technology, but the market is saturated. How do you differentiate? Or, we love the team, but we're not investing in real estate tech right now, or, my personal favorite, come back when you have more traction. Which was code for, come back when you've already succeeded without our money, so we can jump in and take credit for your success. I'd tried small banks. I'd tried SBA loans. I'd tried angel investors. The answer was always no, not yet, come back when you have more proof of concept. So I decided to visit my father, to ask him if he could give me advice, to see if maybe he'd be willing to invest in the company or at least help me understand what I was missing. Instead, he'd thrown my pitch deck in the trash. I was sitting in Derek's apartment in San Francisco, on a Tuesday morning, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was 206, which meant it was Seattle. I almost didn't answer, but Derek was getting coffee and I was bored, so I picked up. Hi, is this Marcus Thompson? The voice belonged to a woman, professional, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who calls people for a living and has practiced sounding confident. Yes, I said. This is Jennifer Martinez with Cascade Commercial Bank, she said. I'm calling to inform you that your application for a $5 million line of credit has been approved. However, I have some exciting news. Our loan committee reviewed your business plan and felt that the growth potential warranted additional capital. We'd like to offer you $7 million instead of $5 million, with the same terms and interest rate. Is this something you'd be interested in discussing? I stopped breathing. I'm sorry, I said, can you say that again? Your $5 million loan application has been approved, Jennifer said, and we're offering to increase it to $7 million. I'd like to schedule a time for you to come into our Seattle office to sign the paperwork and discuss the disbursement schedule. Does that work for you? Yes, I said immediately. Yes, that absolutely works. I'm sorry, I didn't think the application had even been reviewed yet. I applied maybe 2 weeks ago. Our underwriting team fast-tracked it, Jennifer said. Your business plan is very solid, and honestly, the market opportunity is significant. We'd like to be part of this. We think Apex Analytics is going to be very successful. After I hung up, I just sat there staring at my phone for what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds. Then I called Derek. We got the loan, I said. What? We got the loan. $7 million. We got approved for $7 million. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Derek started laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from genuine shock and relief and excitement all mixed together. What? How? You applied like 2 weeks ago. I know, I said. They fast-tracked it. They apparently think the market opportunity is significant. Dude, Derek said. We're starting a company. Like, actually starting it. We're doing this. We talked for another 20 minutes about next steps, about when we'd move to Seattle, about finding office space, about hiring the first engineers. By the time I hung up, Derek had already texted me a list of 5-person engineering teams he knew that might be interested in joining us. It was happening. It was actually happening. The first thing I did was book a ticket to Seattle for the following Thursday. The second thing I did was call my father. He didn't answer his cell phone, so I called the office. His assistant, Patricia, said he was in a meeting but would call me back. He didn't call back. I waited until that evening and called my mother instead. "Hi, sweetie," she said. She was watching Jeopardy, I could tell by the sound in the background. She watched Jeopardy every evening at 7:30 p.m. without fail. "Mom, is Dad there?" I asked. "He's in his study," she said. "Do you want me to get him?" "No," I said. "Actually, I just wanted to tell you something. I got the business loan. $7 million. The bank approved it yesterday." There was a pause. I could hear Jeopardy continuing in the background, the sound of Alex Trebek's voice, well, technically Ken Jennings now, but I still thought of it as Alex reading a clue. "Oh, Marcus," my mother said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "That's wonderful. That's incredible. Why didn't you tell your father first?" "I'm going to," I said. "But I wanted to tell you. I wanted you to know that it's happening. That Dad was wrong. That this is real." My mother made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sigh. "Your father loves you," she said. "He's just scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. "Scared that you're going to be successful," she said. "Scared that you're going to do something he couldn't do. Scared that you're going to find your own path. Your father built his empire, and he spent 42 years living inside it. The idea that someone else, especially his son, might build something different, something that doesn't look like what he built, that terrifies him. But that doesn't mean he doesn't want it to happen. It just means he can't admit it." The Cascade commercial bank offices were in downtown Seattle, in a building that had been renovated to look modern but still had that old money feeling, like it was a place where serious financial decisions had been made for decades. Jennifer Martinez met me in the lobby. She was younger than her voice had suggested, maybe 40, with the kind of professional confidence that comes from being good at your job and knowing it. We went through the paperwork in a conference room on the 23rd floor. Everything was straightforward: a $7 million line of credit, 6.5% interest, to be disbursed in tranches as needed with documentation of how the money was being used. The terms were actually incredibly favorable, better than I hoped for when I initially applied for the $5 million. "Can I ask you something?" I said as Jennifer was explaining the final disbursement schedule. "Why did you approve this so quickly? And why the increase from $5 million to $7 million? Jennifer leaned back in her chair, and she smiled in a way that suggested she'd been waiting for this question. "Honestly," she said, "your business plan landed on my desk at exactly the right moment. We've been looking at the commercial real estate technology space, and we think it's underserved. Everyone's trying to disrupt residential real estate, Zillow, Redfin, all of them. But commercial real estate is still very analog. It's still about relationships and intuition and old-school analysis. AI that can actually predict market movements? That's disruptive. That's valuable." She tapped the pen against the table. "But more than that," she continued, "your story was compelling. 28 years old, Stanford degree, Wharton MBA, working at a top VC firm, decided to start your own company. And you came to a small regional bank instead of trying to get VC funding. That told me you were either crazy or incredibly smart. My instinct was incredibly smart. You're not asking a bunch of venture capitalists to give you money in exchange for equity. You're building this company and maintaining control. That's the decision of someone who knows what they're doing." I hadn't actually considered that distinction before, but now that she mentioned it, I realized it was true. I'd gone to VCs first because that's what you're supposed to do when you start a tech company. But they'd all said no. So I turned to banks, and the banks had said yes. I was maintaining control because I'd been rejected by the gatekeepers, not because I'd made some brilliant strategic decision. But maybe Jennifer didn't need to know that. "The increase to $7 million, she said, "is because my loan committee looked at your projections and thought they were actually conservative. We think you're going to need more than $5 million to do this right, and we'd rather you come to us for expansion capital than go somewhere else. We're betting on you, Marcus. We think Apex Analytics is going to be huge." I signed the paperwork at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in downtown Seattle, in a conference room that smelled like coffee and expensive leather chairs. When Jennifer slid the final signature page toward me, I held my pen over it for a moment, just looking at the blank line where my name was supposed to go. This was it. This was the moment where I stopped being a guy with an idea and started being a guy with a company. This was the moment where my father's opinions stopped mattering. I signed. 3 months later, Apex Analytics held a press conference at the Seattle Convention Center. We'd hired a PR firm to handle it, and they'd done everything exactly right. We had a booth set up with demo software running. We had Derek presenting the technical aspects of the AI platform. We had testimonials from 3 beta customers who'd already started using our service and seeing results. We had a compelling narrative: 2 Stanford grads, 1 ex-VC guy and 1 brilliant engineer, starting a company that was going to revolutionize commercial real estate investment. The press showed up. The Seattle Times sent someone. GeekWire sent 2 people. TechCrunch sent someone who actually seemed interested in what we were doing. And my father watched it on the news. That's what my mother told me, anyway. She called me that evening after the press conference had wrapped up, and she said that my father had been sitting in his study, had turned on the news, and had seen my face and Derek's face and the Apex Analytics logo all over the screen while the reporter talked about a new artificial intelligence platform that's disrupting the commercial real estate investment space. He didn't say anything, my mother reported. He just sat there and watched the whole thing. And then he asked me where you were and if you were coming home for dinner this weekend. I wasn't planning to go home. I was planning to stay in Seattle, in the apartment Derek and I had rented near South Lake Union, and work on the product. But my mother's tone, that careful, hopeful tone, suggested that maybe I should reconsider. So I drove up to my parents' house on Saturday afternoon, and I knocked on the door like I was a stranger, because something about what had happened made me feel like a stranger, like I'd crossed some invisible line and couldn't quite find my way back to being their son. My father answered the door. We looked at each other for a moment, and I could see something shift in his face. It was subtle, the kind of shift that only happens when someone realizes they've been wrong about something fundamental. "Hi, Dad," I said. "Marcus," he said, and he stepped aside to let me into the house. "Come in." We sat in his study, in the leather chairs that faced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. My father had poured us both a glass of scotch, the good kind that he only broke out for special occasions. We didn't talk for a few minutes. We just sat there looking out at the water, and I realized that this was the first time I could remember being in the same room with my father where I wasn't trying to prove something to him or defend something to him or apologize for something to him. "I saw the news," he said finally. "I know," I said. $7 million, he said. $7 million, I confirmed. He took a sip of his scotch. "I owe you an apology," he said, and the words sounded like they hurt him, like they were heavy and difficult to carry. "I told you that your plan was stupid. I told you that you were going to lose everything. I told you that you didn't have what it takes to build a real business. And I was wrong." "You were scared," I said, repeating what my mother had told me. "You were scared that I was going to succeed in a way that looked different from how you succeeded." My father nodded slowly. "I spent 42 years building something tangible," he said. "Something you can touch and see and walk through. Your company is software. It's data. It's something that exists in abstract space, and I don't understand it. That scared me. When I don't understand something, I assume it's not real. I assume it's not valuable. And I use that assumption to protect myself from having to admit that the world has changed in ways I'm not equipped to navigate." He looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud that you saw something no one else was seeing. I'm proud that you found a way to fund it when the obvious doors closed. I'm proud that you had the courage to do something different from what I did. And I'm sorry that I couldn't tell you that earlier." I didn't say anything. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder, and we sat like that for a long time, 2 men separated by generation and experience and the fundamental inability to communicate until something forced us to try. "I'm sorry too," I said finally. "I should have listened to your concerns. I should have taken your advice seriously. Even though you were wrong about the business plan, you weren't wrong about the fact that this is hard. You weren't wrong about the fact that I needed to be careful. I just had to find my own way of being careful." "That's what it is to be a parent," my father said. "You spend years trying to prepare your children for the world, and then they go out and prove that they don't need your preparation. They need their own preparation. Their own experience. Their own mistakes. 2 years later, Apex Analytics had grown to a team of 35 people. We expanded our product line to include not just predictive analytics but also portfolio optimization tools and market reporting. Our customers included some of the largest commercial real estate firms in the country. We were on track to do $2 million in annual recurring revenue, which meant we were on track to profitability within 18 months. The VC firms that had rejected us were now calling, wanting to invest. I'd turned them all down. Derek and I had discussed it, and we decided that the bank loan had actually been better for us than equity funding would have been. We maintained complete control of the company. We didn't have to answer to board members or investors who wanted us to pursue growth at the expense of profitability. We were building the company we wanted to build, not the company that would make other people the most money. My father had become one of our first paying customers. He'd integrated our AI platform into his real estate development company's investment decision-making process, and his investment returns had improved by 12% in the first year. He never said anything about it directly, but my mother mentioned that he'd started recommending us to other developers he knew. He'd become, in his way, our first advocate. We went to dinner once a month now, the three of us, my parents and me. It was something we'd started doing informally and then decided to make official. It was a way of staying connected, of maintaining relationship even though we were living separate lives in separate cities and building separate legacies. On the third anniversary of Apex Analytics founding, my father took me to lunch at his favorite restaurant in Seattle, the place he'd been taking business associates and family members for decades. Over lunch, he told me something I'd never heard him say before. "I'm not sure I would have done what you did," he said. "I'm not sure I would have had the courage to do something that radical, something that different from what everyone else was doing. I built my company by following the template that existed in 1982. I refined it. I optimized it. But I didn't reinvent it. You're reinventing what it means to be in the real estate business. That's different. That's harder. That's braver." "I had something you didn't have," I said. "What's that?" he asked. "Permission to fail," I said. "You were so successful so quickly that you couldn't afford to fail. I failed multiple times before I found something that worked. I was rejected by every venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. I was thrown out of my own father's house. And somehow, that made it easier to keep going. Because I'd already lost everything that mattered, so I might as well try." My father smiled, and it was the kind of smile that comes from genuine understanding, genuine connection. "You know," he said, "maybe I did you the biggest favor I could have done by throwing that pitch deck in the trash." The moment that really mattered, though, was when Apex Analytics was valued at $500 million by a private equity firm that wanted to acquire 15% of the company. I wasn't selling. Derek and I had discussed it, and we'd decided to stay private, to stay independent, to stay in control. But the valuation, the independent, third-party valuation that said Apex Analytics was worth $500 million, that was the moment my father finally understood. He was watching the news when it was announced. He saw my face. He saw the company logo. He saw the words, "valued at $500 million," on the screen. And he called me immediately. "That's incredible," he said. "Marcus, that's absolutely incredible." "Thanks, Dad," I said. "I threw your pitch deck in the trash," he said. "I told you that your plan was stupid. And now your company is worth $500 million. Do you know how crazy that is?" "I know," I said. "I love you," my father said. "I want you to know that I love you. And I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what you were trying to do." "I love you too," I said. And I meant it. When I hung up, I opened my laptop and checked the valuation email one more time. $500 million. 10 years ago, I was sitting in my father's study, and he was telling me I was going to lose everything. He was telling me that my idea was stupid. He was telling me that I didn't have what it took. And he was right to be scared. He was right to be concerned. He was right to worry. But he was wrong about the outcome. Because sometimes the people who love you the most are also the people who understand you the least. And sometimes the best thing they can do is get out of your way and let you prove them wrong.